Thanks everybody for joining us and good afternoon. I'm Susan Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause New York. And I'm pleased to be joined by two of the candidates running for Senate District 25 in Brooklyn, Jabari Brisport and Jason Salmon. All candidates for that office were invited to join us today. The 213 members of the New York State Legislature last met remotely to pass the budget about a month ago. That means New Yorkers have gone more than a month without Democratic representation in state government, leaving Governor Cuomo to essentially govern by executive order and sign sweeping temporary changes into law. Excuse me. And while he is correctly triaging the current state of emergency, he has also changed 262 laws in 55 days, according to Monday's Albany Times-Union. This is not how the policy-making process works in a representative democracy. New Yorkers elected our state senators and assembly members from 62 counties to represent 19 million interests, issues, and points of view. The New York City Council members, who represent parts of Senate District 25, including Lori Cumbo, Robert Cornegy, Brad Lander, and Carlos Menchaca, have been holding public hearings and passed legislation remotely for the past 2 weeks. This is what we expect our state lawmakers to be doing too, just like the largest school district in the country and hundreds of service providers, organizations, corporations, and nonprofits across New York have adopted to work remotely. Common Cause New York has held press conferences with lawmakers, advocacy groups, social service providers. We all need legislators to resume remote session and do their jobs making laws. Now we'll be hearing from Jabari Brisport. Jabari.
Thanks so much, Susan. A wonderful introduction and framing of what's going on right now. Hey, everybody. Jabari Brisport here, born and bred Brooklynite. I grew up in Prospect Heights. I'm also a public school teacher. I teach middle school math in Crown Heights. And I'm running for state senate to fight for my students and also their families. I want to thank Common Cause for hosting this press conference. I really appreciate the work they're doing, fighting for public financing of campaigns. I think that's really essential to democracies. And I'm also here today specifically because, you know, while I don't disagree with every single thing the governor is doing, I do think he's made it kind of clear in this scenario that he's comfortable trampling over our democracy. I mean, recently he fought for the cancellation of the presidential primary. Back on March 3rd, he really pushed the state legislature to drastically expand his own personal powers in the executive seat. And right now it kind of feels like he's exploiting the situation to force through an agenda that is not going to be good for anyone but the wealthiest people in New York. So again, I'm a public school teacher, and I feel that currently, while our state legislature is out of session, you know, the governor is putting my students' education and their futures at risk. We've already forced through a budget that cuts services like Medicaid and failed to raise taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers. And right now, what it looks like with the proposed education cuts is that Cuomo is deciding that millionaires are more important than public education for our children. And, you know, we can't afford to invest in our children's futures right now because, you know, the governor's not prioritizing the needs of everyday New Yorkers over the rich and powerful. And that's not the kind of decision that one millionaire with no background in education should be able to make unchecked. And we need the legislature back in power because the legislature is the best check we have on unbridled executive power. And, you know, between slashing our schools budgets and pushing cuts to our healthcare system, it's clear, you know, Cuomo needs to be checked. So, you know, you heard Susan say, like, the city council has been meeting virtually and working on laws to help New York City residents. The state legislature should be doing the same thing to ensure that essential services are protected and strengthened at a moment when New Yorkers need it the most. I know I have, many other people have been reaching out to community members, making sure they get food, medicine, anything the most vulnerable people in our communities need at this time. And it's more important than ever that we also protect their participation in our democracy. So thanks again for having me. And thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jabari. Next, we'll hear from Jason Salmon.
Yes, thank you, Susan, for holding this forum. I think it's incredibly important that we get back to session to protect everyday New Yorkers. My name is Jason Salmon. I'm born and raised right here in Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, Brooklyn, right in the middle of the 25th Senate District. And I have an interesting experience of having a dual lens, right? I've been a community organizer around police reform, and I've also spent time the last 3 years in the state legislature. So I've seen up close and personal how our political system is fundamentally flawed. I've been on the front lines advocating for truly affordable housing, fighting against socially irresponsible development like 80 Flatbush, and the expansion of the Brooklyn House of Detention in connection with closing Rikers. So what I can tell you is that, what runs New York City and what runs the state is private interests and corporate interests and not everyday New Yorkers. And that's something that we desperately need to change. And now we're in the midst of COVID. And this is a public crisis, health crisis, the likes of which none of us ever seen. We're in just dire straits, especially communities of color. What we're seeing around the enforcement of social distancing on behalf of the NYPD, where we're seeing white people in parks who are sunbathing, they're being handed masks with friendly smiles, they might as well be handed ice creams as well. But in areas like Brownsville and in areas like Bedford-Stuyvesant, Black teenagers and brown teenagers are being brutalized. And this is something that we've always dealt with, and this is something that we need to address. So I agree, Susan, the legislature needs to go back to session. And what they need to do, the first step they could take is repealing 50A. So NYPD aren't hiring officers like Mr. Garcia, who brutalized Donnie Wright on video for all of us to see. So people like that aren't walking around with a badge. We need to repeal 50A. We need to house the homeless. Right now, the NYPD are clearing homeless individuals out of train stations, but we're not housing them. We need to end the criminalization of poverty. And I think we can use COVID as an opportunity to actually change the way we treat people here in the state of New York. But the only way we can actually do that is if we don't allow Governor Cuomo to issue executive orders behind closed doors. We need to go back to session so that we can protect everyday New Yorkers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for helping to get this message out. And we're going to conclude. Thanks again and stay safe.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.